Trump and Intel. A controversy erupts over information the president shared with the Russians. Will have reaction from lawmakers. Syria safe zones. One group's push to establish secure areas for Christians in the Middle East. Changing rhetoric. The nation's largest abortion provider is modifying its language. We'll tell you why. And Vatican finances. We'll go to Rome for an update on progress being made on financial reform in the Holy See. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 16th, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. The White House is pushing back against allegations that President Trump disclosed classified information about ISIS to Russian officials. The Washington Post says it happened during an Oval Office meeting last week, a story which has sparked a firestorm here in the nation's capital. Donald Trump's national security advisor is defending the president today, calling his revelations about the Islamic State to Russian officials routine.
In the context of that discussion, what the president discussed with the foreign minister was wholly appropriate to that conversation and is consistent with the routine sharing of information between the president and any leaders with whom he's engaged.
Trump himself says he has the authority to share facts pertaining to terrorism, that it's his absolute right as president to do so. The controversy comes after reports the president shared details about an Islamic State terror threat with Russia's foreign minister and ambassador last week. The reports are based on anonymous sources in the Trump administration, but the White House press secretary questioned the credibility of those unnamed officials today.
You've got to wonder why it was done and who did it. I think it is frankly concerning, and it should be to every American that we have information of a sensitive and classified nature that is being sent out into the open.
The revelations could cloud Trump's first overseas trip as president this Friday. After visits to Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Vatican, he'll meet some of Washington's strongest European partners at a NATO summit in Brussels and the G7 in Sicily.
The Oval Office is the Oval Office, and at the end of the day, it's the president's judgment and character that the allies are looking towards. So this is kind of a very large hiccup just before he begins this most important trip.
The alleged release of classified information also causes concern for lawmakers. Correspondent Jason Calvi continues our coverage from Capitol Hill. Jason?
Wyatt, Republican Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Bob Corker says the Trump White House is in a downward spiral. The Republican Senator John McCain says the claims could lead allies to stop sharing intelligence with the United States. But a common theme I'm hearing from Trump supporters is a questioning of the unnamed sources and the news reports. Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy did just that when we spoke today.
There are some members of the press that are trying to report to the American people that we're having a constitutional crisis up here every day, and we're not. And I would suggest to the people in the White House, if they're going to make a serious allegation like this, not to do it anonymously. Stand up, be a man, be a woman, look the American people in the eye and say, this is serious and here are the facts.
Other Republicans like Maine's Susan Collins have called for the Senate Intelligence Committee to be immediately briefed. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says that we could do with a little less drama from the White House, while Florida Democrat Bill Nelson tells me revealing this information about the Islamic State's use of laptops on planes could help the terror group.
What does this say to the enemies, to ISIS?
ISIS is trying to reverse engineer right now the comments to determine what city it was and therefore who might be an inside mole in ISIS. And you know what ISIS does to people when they don't like them. They either put them in cages and burn them or they cut off their heads.
Top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer says the Intelligence Committee should have access to transcripts from the Oval Office meeting where the Washington Post says the president shared the classified information with Russia. Wyatt, CIA Director Mike Pompeo is briefing the House Intelligence Committee tonight, where we can expect some very tough questions on this story.
So, Jason, what has the White House told lawmakers regarding the sharing of confidential information?
The chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr, says he hasn't heard from the White House. He says he wants someone who was in the Oval Office during the Russian meeting to tell him exactly what happened.
Correspondent Jason Calvi reporting from Capitol Hill. Thanks for that update, Jason. President Trump welcomes another head of state to the White House. He's holding his first face-to-face meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan.
We've had a great relationship, and we will make it even better.
President Trump says it was a great honor to welcome Erdogan. The Turkish leader says both countries will continue to work alongside each other at the United Nations and NATO. The meeting comes a week after news the U.S. would arm Kurds fighting ISIS in Syria. It's a move that upset Turkey, which views Kurdish forces as terrorists. Joining us now is Aykan Erdemir, a senior fellow with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a former member of the Turkish parliament. Thanks for being with us. You know, Turkey is an important U.S. ally, and there is been some tension recently, at least with that point that I'd last made about the Kurdish forces. Do you think that the two leaders can come to an agreement on this issue?
A U-turn on the U.S. side is impossible. U.S. is already committed to working with the YPG, the Kurdish group, in liberating Raqqa. And the best at this point Turkey can hope for is post-liberation Raqqa could be Arab-dominated rule and not Kurdish-dominated rule.
Well, the leaders didn't address human rights in this particular meeting today, but there is an American pastor, Andrew Brunson, who has been in a Turkish jail now for 7 months because of his Christian faith. Is there any hope of his being released at any point?
Actually, in the run-up to the meeting, there have been reminders both from the Congress, from various faith organizations, for President Trump to mention the issue to Turkish President Erdogan. And we have to keep in mind that Pastor Brunson is just the tip of the iceberg. Turkey's Jews and Christians have been under immense pressure, especially since the abortive coup in 2016. And U.S. Pastor Brunson has been held in prison. There's no due process. There's no attorney-client privilege. And anyone who has seen the case knows that it's really based on ludicrous charges of being a member of an armed terrorist organization. I think this was a missed opportunity. We know that the Turkish government is quite, let's say, open to shaming, naming and shaming. And I think it's very important to keep constant pressure so that not only U.S. Pastor Brunson is released, but also that other Christians and Jews under similar kind of pressure get some relief.
Well, President Erdogan faces his own pressure in his own country, especially after a recent referendum vote, which essentially gave him even more powers. And in the meantime, though, President Trump has congratulated him. What do you think the relationship is like between Trump and Erdogan right now?
I think President Erdogan is in a deep state of panic because following the recent referendum in Turkey, President Erdogan was feeling that he has a legitimacy crisis because he was caught red-handed in rigging the ballot box. You know, this was in international reports. So the phone call from President Trump to President Erdogan was a lifeline back then. So I think President Trump today knows how desperate President Erdogan is for this one-to-one opportunity, for this photo op in Washington, because it gives him some level of legitimacy back home. So I think from this point on, President Trump's treatment of President Erdogan would be mostly through the pleasantries exchange. It's more rhetoric rather than delivering on the key issues like the YPG or the extradition case or the case of a Turkish-Iranian sanctions buster tried in New York.
Diplomacy is such a key issue here. Dr. Aykan Erdemir, Senior Fellow for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and former member of the Turkish Parliament. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Serious accusations against Syria. The United States says the country has executed thousands of imprisoned political opponents. The U.S. released satellite images of a prison in Syria where it's believed the government is burning bodies to hide evidence of the mass killings. The State Department says it believes about 50 detainees are being killed each day. The Trump administration is also stepping up criticism of Iran and Russia for supporting the Syrian government and President Bashar al-Assad. Creating safe zones for Syria to end the refugee crisis. That was the topic of a Capitol Hill briefing today. The executive director for the group In Defense of Christians tells EWTN News Nightly the group is pushing for a solution.
protect the minorities that are fleeing en masse from Syria, because at the end of the day, sometimes they have the means to do that. They don't want to stay in an active conflict zone. And then also protect one of the last remaining relatively democratic, pluralistic societies, which is in Lebanon.
Representatives Darren LaHood and Marcy Kaptur have introduced a bipartisan bill in the House that would establish safe zones to help refugees in Syria and neighboring Lebanon. Chaos erupts in Venezuela during another round of protests against the socialist government. At least 3 new deaths are reported and hundreds of injuries. The unrest is taking a toll as the opposition vows to step up demonstrations. The country's president, Nicolas Maduro, says he'll resolve the nation's crisis by rewriting the Constitution. His opponents want a new presidential election held immediately. Pope Francis sends a telegram to the new president of France. In it, the Holy Father urges Emmanuel Macron to strengthen France's Christian roots. The newly sworn-in leader met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel yesterday. It's a tradition for French presidents to make their first foreign trip to Germany. The Vatican faces more hurdles in its efforts to reform its finances and make the process more transparent. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Edward, according to the Vatican today, what progress has been made in cleaning up the Vatican's finances?
Well, the big thing today, White, was that the number of problematic, suspicious financial transactions has actually decreased over the past year from 2015 to 2016. It's gone down from 540 cases to just under 200. That's a drop from $10 million to $2 million for suspicious activity. So they're saying that's a very positive trend. Also, the fact that they're cooperating more, the Vatican, with external authorities, foreign authorities. Those have gone up, they say, from around just under 200 to now 700 cases of dealing with foreign authorities. So they're saying this is a very positive development.
Yeah, so clearly they are making progress. So then what concerns remain in terms of reform?
Well, although there has been that greater cooperation, there's been little accountability. This is the complaint from the monitoring body of the Council of Europe called Moneyval. They say there's been no real result in terms of bringing these people to justice who are involved in this suspicious activity. And they say that that needs to be looked at. The Vatican is trying to toe a fine line here by trying to retain its sovereignty, but at the same time enforce new rules to try and clean up the finances. So they're trying to do that, but again, there's this problem with accountability, which they're going to be looking at in the coming years, I expect.
And there is still some resistance to financial reform within the Vatican internally. So what's the latest in addressing that issue?
Well, this has been a problem ongoing since the reform started. There's certain pockets of resistance in the Vatican. The latest has been with the Vatican's real estate body called APSA, which has been trying to take things in its own hands and do an external audit on their own efforts, without the Secretariat for the Economy or the Secretariat of State. Cardinal Pell, who's head of the Secretariat of State, brought them into line and tried to put some control on that. But it shows that there are pockets of resistance, and as Cardinal Pell said, though, that the moment of truth is coming, he thinks, when these resistances will decline and the reforms will actually be achieved.
Still a long ways to go, but it does sound like they're making some considerable progress. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks, Edward.
Thanks, Wayne.
A former bishop of Brooklyn, New York, who served as Supreme Chaplain of the Knights of Columbus for 18 years, has died. Bishop Emeritus Thomas Daly passed away yesterday. He was in charge of spiritual formation for the Knights from 1987 until 2005. Bishop Daly was also a key figure in the pro-life movement as one of the first U.S. bishops to lead rosary processions outside abortion clinics. In a statement, Supreme Knight Carl Anderson writes, Bishop Daly followed the example of the Good Shepherd and cared deeply for his diocese flock and for the Knights of Columbus. Bishop Daly was 89 years old. Coming up, helping Iraqis rebuild.
To be honest, we don't get much cooperation from Baghdad in terms of caring for the displaced.
The threat still facing persecuted Christians in Iraq. And tips from the Holy Father on how to find peace.
Quella pace da dentro che un regalo non si perde.
Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. Part of today's gospel reading from John chapter 14. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Iraqi officials say ISIS militants are completely surrounded and on the brink of total defeat in Mosul. It comes as Iraq's militia forces celebrate the liberation of 3 villages from the terror group. Right now, ISIS reportedly controls less than 5 square miles of the northern Iraqi city. As Iraqis struggle to recover, many Christians have taken refuge in Kurdistan. It's a semi-autonomous region in the north of Iraq. Lauren Ashburn recently interviewed a Kurdistan official who says help is desperately needed.
Joining us now is Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman, the representative of the Kurdistan regional government to the U.S. Welcome to the program. Tell me about the relationship between Kurdistan and Iraq in terms of helping Christians who have been pushed out of their homeland.
Well, I would say that the majority of Christians in Iraq are now sheltering in Kurdistan region in Iraq. There are very, very few Christian families that are left in Baghdad or Basra even. Basra used to be a thriving center for Christians in Iraq, but that's a long time ago. Unfortunately, with what happened to the Christian community under ISIS, particularly after 2014, tens of thousands, maybe 200,000 fled to Kurdistan. To be honest, we don't get much cooperation from Baghdad in terms of caring for the displaced, whoever they are, whether they're Christian, Yazidis, or the Muslim Arabs. There are about 1 million Muslim Arabs who have sheltered in Kurdistan. Baghdad doesn't help us very much. So in terms of assistance from Baghdad, there isn't much going on.
Well, what do you believe the role of the U.S. then and the UN should be in helping Iraq rebuild after ISIS? What would you like to see?
Well, wherever ISIS has been, there has been utter destruction. And they have also left mines and unexploded devices.
IEDs, yes. When we were in one of the towns, I saw posted on different doorways, the IEDs and people walking through the field. In other words, I couldn't read it, but it said, be careful.
Absolutely. I mean, the majority of the Peshmerga who have died in the fight against ISIS have actually died from the unexploded devices, not so much from the actual fighting. And so one of the first things that we need the UN and the United States to show leadership on is to decontaminate these bombs and mines, and then to engage in a huge, substantial reconstruction program. And I liken it to the big Marshall Plan that we, or the United States and Britain and the coalition had after the Second World War. It needs to be a construction program on a massive scale, not the ad hoc kind of pledges that we've had, with all my respect to all the people that have been pledging. But the scale of the destruction will cost billions and billions to undo or repair, let's say.
Look at Batnaya, look at the rubble. It's 90% of the city is decimated, and then you have all of the devices that are left behind. How can people be expected without help to rebuild their lives?
Absolutely, and this is one of the frustrations for the displaced people. They want to go home, and we want them to go home, not just because, of course, we have the responsibility to provide for them, but we don't want the Christians to leave Iraq or to leave Kurdistan.
Of course.
It's their homeland. They were there before many of us were there, and we want them to stay. And the longer that they're displaced, the longer they're away from home, away from their business, from their school or whatever, the more likely that they'll get on a rickety boat
and go to Australia or go to Italy or go someplace else. That's what I've heard too. Thank you so much, Bayan Sami Abdul Rahman. So nice having you on the program. I hope you come back.
Thank you.
Despite the death and destruction in Iraq, the church is active and young people are living out their faith. Our team learned that firsthand on a recent visit to the region. These Catholic teenagers live in the north of Iraq in the Nineveh Plain. We met them last month during a parish gathering. ISIS took over their town for a few weeks, but was driven out at the end of last year. Now their families are resettling in the village. They say their faith in Jesus Christ gives them the fuel to keep going. Up next, a leader in the pro-life movement tells us why pro-abortion advocates are trying to shed the pro-choice label, and celebrating Our Lady of Fatima. In the Diocese of El Paso, Texas.
pace di Dio è una pace.
True peace comes not from man, but from the Holy Spirit. That was the Pope's message at Mass this morning. The Holy Father focused his homily on John's Gospel, saying God's peace is a gift that keeps us going. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. The state of Texas is asking the federal government to provide funding for a state-run women's health program that excludes abortion providers, a request denied under the Obama administration. Since 2011, Texas has passed on millions of dollars in federal Medicare dollars so abortion providers, like Planned Parenthood, would not have access to certain funding. The new request is an apparent test for the Trump administration and could provide a model for other conservative states. Jeannie Mancini, president of the March for Life Education and Defense Fund, joins us now. So Jeannie, we heard about Texas trying to get federal funds now for this state-run women's health program. If they're successful at getting it from the federal government, how big of a win would this be for the pro-life movement?
Well, it's a huge win. I mean, just in as much as abortion is not health care. I mean, let's consider what it is. I mean, killing unborn children is, as far from true health care as we can possibly get. So to separate abortion providers, abortion clinics from true holistic women's health would be a natural and a very good thing, not only for the movement, for women, I mean for everyone involved. So it would be moving in the right direction, in my opinion.
Sending a powerful message from a federal government basis. In a recent interview, Cecile Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood, talked about a 2013 decision to stop using the pro-choice label. And I want to read something that she said. She had a quote here. We've really quit using political labels that are really, frankly, very binary, in which most people don't feel like they reflect on how important and personal these decisions are. So Richards calls these political labels, but the reality is the political landscape has changed so much since 2013. What's your reaction to that and the use of sort of political labels in all of this?
Well, my blood starts to boil a little bit whenever I hear Cecile Richards say they're getting away from anything political, because the truth of the matter is, when she became president of Planned Parenthood, she said that her stated goal was to make it the most powerful political kick-butt organization out there. And so many people don't know that. So yes, it's true, sometimes the pro-choice and the pro-life labels stir up, emotions and thoughts about the politics of it all. But look, the truth of the matter is that what we stand for, which is the inherent dignity of the human person from conception to natural death, it really doesn't matter what you call it. It is truth, it's freedom, and we're on the right side. And Planned Parenthood, our nation's largest abortion provider, the big political kick-butt organization that she's grown it to be, is not. They're not on the right side of life. They're not on the right side of truth, freedom, choice, what have you here.
What about young people? You talk to so many young people. How do they react to the pro-life labels? How do they think of themselves in terms of that?
What I have found with young people, and we have so very many, of course, that come to the March for Life, I mean, it's largely young people. There are tens and thousands of young, happy people. They see this as a human rights issue and a social justice issue. I saw a wonderful T-shirt a few weeks ago when I was flying down to speak in Florida, and on the back of it, it read, "Social justice begins in the womb." And I think that really resonates with young people. It resonates in my heart. It's true, right? So inherent dignity of the human person from conception to natural death, and so young people know, as they say, that they are the pro-life generation, whether they're going to call it with that label or not. They're advocating for the right thing.
Powerful message. Jeannie Mancini, president of the March for Life Education and Defense Fund. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.
Finally tonight, a special celebration in the Diocese of El Paso, Texas. Bruce Reed, an EWTN News Nightly viewer, shared this video with us. I was really looking forward to seeing that video too. Catholics gathered this past weekend to celebrate several things: Mother's Day, the 100th anniversary of the apparitions in Fatima, and also the 100th year of St. Patrick's Cathedral, the mother church of the diocese, which sits on the border of the U.S. and Mexico. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll see you back here again tomorrow. We leave you with more of the El Paso celebration that Bruce Reed sent us, with music from the St. Patrick Cathedral Music Ministers. Good night, and God bless.